I wasn't really invited. Oh, sure, the invitation had our family name on it. But I could tell from the moment I stepped onto Kyle's polished porch that I wasn't meant to show up. The whole thing was being hosted by my daughter's in-laws, at their estate, in their style, with their kind of people. Shiny shoes, champagne flutes, conversations about hedge funds and tech startups. And then there was me, Frank Dawson, a retired mechanic in a wrinkled button-down and oil still under his fingernails. Kyle spotted me first. "Didn't know we had a pit crew coming tonight," he said, loud enough for the guests to hear. Laughter followed. Not one face turned in my favor. What they didn't know was, I was late because I stopped to help a woman stranded on the roadside, and what none of them expected was who she really was, until she walked in, and everything changed. Before we go on, I just want to say, this channel is still small, but every view, every comment, every subscriber means the world to us. If you're listening, would you help us grow by hitting subscribe and tell us in the comments, where in the world are you tuning in from? Thank you. I've always liked the quiet. Not the kind of silence that comes from being ignored at a fancy dinner table or left out of family photos, but the honest kind. The hum of a garage at 6 a.m., the hiss of a wrench turning loose a stubborn bolt, the soft shuffle of gravel under boots. That kind of silence. I retired 2 years ago, 38 years in the same auto shop just outside of Boulder, Colorado. Same steel door, same cracked concrete floor, same black coffee in the same dented thermos. I didn't leave rich, but I left proud. And I thought that counted for something. Apparently, not everyone agrees. Jessica, my daughter, she used to beg to sit on the shop counter while I worked. She'd dangle her legs and ask questions about spark plugs and oil filters like she was trying to learn a new language. I still remember the way her face lit up the first time she started her own car without help. A little blue Civic I fixed up for her high school graduation. Back then, it felt like she saw me. The man under the grease and denim, the father who didn't miss a single parent-teacher night, who worked double shifts to pay off her tuition, who drove across state lines to pick her up when her car broke down freshman year. That was before Kyle. Her husband is a man of polished shoes and clean hands. The kind of guy who calls working-class people salt of the earth like it's some sort of charity compliment. His family owns 3 properties, none smaller than 5 bedrooms. His father plays golf with city councilmen. His mother hosts fundraisers for causes she can't pronounce. When Jessica brought him home the first time, I tried my best. I combed my hair, wore a shirt without stains, even kept my jokes to myself. Kyle smiled the whole time, but it was the kind of smile you wear at a job interview, not with family. He shook my hand like I was a waiter handing him a bill. After the wedding, things changed. Jessica called less. Visits became shorter. I chalked it up to newlywed life at first. Then, it became routine, messages left unread, calls unanswered, holidays spent at Kyle's parents' this year. I started to feel like an old wrench tucked away in a drawer, useful once, now just taking up space. Still, I didn't say anything. I never do. That's not how I was raised. I kept showing up, birthdays, barbecues, baby showers. I brought tools when something broke, fixed things without being asked, handed Kyle envelopes when the roof leaked or the heater died. He always said thanks through his teeth, like the words cost him something. The last time I saw Kyle's family before the party, his father introduced me as Jessica's dad. Used to work with cars or something. No name, no mention of the shop I ran, the business I built with my bare hands. Just used to work. I remember that sentence more clearly than anything else that night. But even after all that, I kept quiet. Because of Jessica. Because she still called me Dad. Because she still smiled, even if it didn't reach her eyes anymore. She once told me, You always knew how to fix things, Dad. And maybe I held on to that a little too tightly. When the invitation came in the mail, white envelope, gold lettering, I knew it wasn't from her. It was from Kyle's family. A private investor dinner. It read, "Dress semi-formal. Prompt arrival appreciated." I left the invitation sitting on the kitchen table for 3 days. Didn't open it right away. Just stared at the envelope like it might disappear if I waited long enough. It had that thick, textured paper, the kind rich folks use to prove something important's inside. My name was handwritten, in ink too smooth to come from any pen I own. When I finally slid it open with my old pocket knife, I found a cream-colored card with gold cursive letters. "You are cordially invited." All that formal talk. The kind of language that feels like it was written by someone who's never called anyone Dad. I read it twice, slower the second time. A private gathering, hosted by Kyle's family. Investor dinner. Semi-formal attire required. Prompt arrival appreciated. Not a single word from Jessica. I checked the return address. It wasn't their home. It was some mansion outside Evergreen. I didn't recognize the name. Must have been one of Kyle's family's vacation homes. Or maybe just another place rich people borrow for events like this. For a moment, I thought about tossing it in the trash. Thought about making myself a pot of chili that night, putting on an old Western, and letting them have their little gathering without me. After all, they didn't really want me there. They wanted the idea of family unity, wanted Jessica's dad to be a silent fixture in the background, a checked box. But still, I couldn't shake the thought of her. I imagined Jessica scanning the room that night, looking for me. Maybe, just maybe, she'd feel a little hurt if I didn't show. Maybe she'd need a reminder, one face in the crowd that still saw her as the girl who used to fall asleep in the passenger seat of my truck, holding a half-eaten donut. So I decided I'd go. Not for them, for her. I opened the hallway closet and looked at my options. The suit I wore to her wedding still hung there, a little dusty, but clean. I ran my fingers over the lapel and thought about that day, how I'd walked her down the aisle and tried not to show how tight my chest felt. I'd never thought I'd be giving her away to someone who made her smaller, not bigger. I laid the suit out on the bed, checked for stains, and polished my old leather boots. The same pair I wore the day I closed the shop for good. They still had oil in the cracks no toothbrush could reach, but they were honest boots. Boots that had carried me through 4 decades of hard work and dignity. As I dressed, I looked in the mirror and tried to see myself the way they would. Retired mechanic, calloused hands, wrinkles around the eyes from too many years squinting under hoods. No college degree, no business cards, no country club membership. Just a man with a few good stories and an empty house. But I didn't flinch. I didn't adjust my shirt or try to hide the lines on my face. Because those lines, they were earned. When I got into my truck, the sun was already dropping behind the mountains. The sky burned with that late autumn orange, my favorite kind of light. I drove slow, both hands on the wheel, letting the heater hum just enough to knock off the chill. About halfway there, I passed through a stretch of road winding along the hills. No lights, just pine trees and a narrow shoulder. That's when I saw her. A black sedan, flashers on, pulled off to the side, hood up, smoke, or maybe just steam, curling out. I slowed down without thinking. Rolled down the window and called out, "You all right, ma'am?" She looked up from her phone, clearly frustrated, maybe a little shaken, dressed well, like she belonged at one of Kyle's parties, mid-50s, maybe early 60s, hair pulled back neat, hands shaking just slightly. "Car just died," she said. "I called roadside, but they said it could take an hour." I nodded. Mind if I take a look?" She hesitated for half a second, then stepped aside. I pulled the truck over, got out, and grabbed my flashlight from the glove box. My boots hit gravel with that familiar crunch. As I walked toward the car, I rolled up my sleeves. Didn't think about the suit. Didn't think about the party. Just did what I've always done when someone's stranded on the side of the road. Help. The engine hissed like it was holding in a secret. I popped the hood and leaned in. The smell of coolant and overheated metal hit me right away. She stood to the side, arms folded tight, the chill of the mountain air cutting through her coat. "It just stopped," she said again, voice taut with frustration. No warning lights. Nothing. I nodded slowly, hands moving out of instinct. I checked the belts, the hoses, the battery connections. One of the clamps was loose, barely holding on, a cheap fix, if caught in time. But it had likely shorted something in the ignition system. I turned and smiled gently. "Looks like a bad connection knocked out your start. Nothing fatal." She blinked. "Can you fix it?" I didn't answer. I just went back to the truck, grabbed a small wrench and a set of gloves. The gloves were worn thin at the palms, but they were mine. Familiar. I'd used them on cars twice as old, in storms twice as bad. I knelt by her engine, careful not to brush against her dress. The cold metal bit into my knuckles as I tightened the terminal and adjusted the clamp. The work was messy, always is, but it felt good to use my hands again, to be needed. She watched quietly, not saying much, but I caught her glancing at her watch. Not impatient, just anxious. "Got somewhere to be?" I asked without looking up. She hesitated. "Yes, a dinner. Important one." I smiled without turning. "Me too." It took about 15 minutes to get things steady. I had her sit in the driver's seat and turn the key while I watched the engine. It coughed once, then started clean. She lit up. "Oh, that's incredible," I waved it off. "Nothing a good connection can't fix." She stepped out, walked over to me, and reached into her purse. "Let me pay you for your time. Please. At least let me." I raised a hand. "Don't worry about it. Just don't forget to replace that battery cable soon, or you'll end up back on the shoulder next week." She looked at me, really looked, like I'd surprised her somehow. "Thank you," she said, her voice softer now. "You didn't have to stop." I shrugged. "Ma'am, I've spent my whole life stopping when someone's stranded. Just seemed natural." She nodded. "Well, you may have just saved me more than you realize." With that, she got back into her car. I watched her taillights disappear down the curve before heading back to my truck. I looked down at myself, gloves blackened, cuffs damp, shirt creased, a smear of grease on my forearm. I had less than 20 minutes to get to the party, and no time to change. I could have turned around, gone back home. Wasn't like anyone would miss me. But I thought of Jessica, thought maybe she'd be waiting at the door. Maybe she'd smile when she saw me, even just a little. So I got back in the truck, wiped my hands on an old towel, and headed down the road. As I approached the estate, tall gates, manicured hedges, lights glowing from every window, I saw the valet glance at my truck with thinly veiled concern. I rolled down the window. He took the keys with 2 fingers like they might bite. I stepped out, brushed my sleeves, and stood a little straighter. No one here knew what had delayed me. No one here would have cared. But I knew. And that would have to be enough, for now. The front steps gleamed like marble ice under the porch lights. Big white pillars, tall glass doors, and the smell of money so thick you could choke on it. I stood there for a second before pushing the doorbell, just long enough to catch my reflection in the glass. My shirt had a dark smear across the elbow, the boots were scuffed, and despite wiping my face with a towel earlier, a faint streak of oil still clung to my jawline. The door opened before I could adjust my collar. A tall man in a black suit looked me up and down. "Delivery entrance is around back," he said flatly. I blinked. "I'm here for the dinner. Frank Dawson." His eyes narrowed. He scanned the list on the clipboard tucked under his arm, like he expected me to be lying. After a long pause, he stepped aside. "They've already started." The sound of string music and crystal glasses spilled out as I entered. The hallway smelled of pine wood polish and some kind of imported cologne. My boots echoed across the floor, every step reminding me how out of place I was. No one looked up at first. Then a woman near the entrance turned. Her eyes scanned me, paused on my cuffs, then flicked away like I was background noise. I spotted Jessica across the room, standing near the fireplace. Her dress shimmered, simple but elegant. She saw me, but didn't wave, didn't smile, just pressed her lips together and looked down at her glass. And that silence told me more than any words could. Before I could move closer, a hand clapped down on my shoulder. "Frank," Kyle said, wearing that practiced grin. "You made it." I turned to face him. He looked the way men like him always do at parties. Slick, confident, expensive, tie sharp, jaw clean, hair set just right. "Ran into a bit of a car issue on the way," I said simply. He leaned in a little and sniffed. "I can tell." Behind him, a group of his friends watched with thin amusement. One of them, some guy in a blazer 2 sizes too small, snickered and muttered something I didn't catch. Kyle didn't introduce me, didn't offer a drink or a seat. He just gestured vaguely toward the back of the room. "We're just about to start the main course," he said. "Try not to track anything in." "All right," I gave him a slow nod. "Of course." As I stepped forward, I heard a woman whisper, "Is that the mechanic guy?" Another voice answered, "That's her father, the one who still drives a truck." The room was full of soft candlelight and sparkling silverware, but all I could see were the sideways glances, the quick, dismissive smiles, the way waiters carefully maneuvered around me like I might spill something greasy. I found a quiet spot near the corner and stood there, hands clasped behind me. No one brought me a plate. No one asked me to join their table. It was as if I wasn't part of the guest list, just a relic someone had dragged in out of obligation. I caught Kyle's mother eyeing me from across the room. She leaned toward Jessica and said something with a frown. My daughter didn't respond. She just kept looking at the floor. I remembered when she used to run up to me after school with stories pouring out of her like water from a broken faucet. Now, she couldn't meet my eyes. I took a deep breath, let it settle in my chest, and reminded myself why I came. Not for them, not for Kyle, but for her. Still, it was hard not to notice how far apart we now stood, even in the same room. Then I felt it, that tightening in the air, like a storm about to break. Because right then, the butler stepped to the front of the room and announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, our final guest has arrived, Ms. Eleanor Myers." Every head turned toward the entrance, and so did mine. The door opened slowly, and in stepped the woman I had helped on the roadside, now washed in golden light, heels clicking softly against the marble as every conversation in the room fell silent. But no one noticed the way my chest tightened. They didn't realize I'd seen her earlier, hunched over her hood in the cold, frustration on her face, not a soul around for miles. They didn't know her palms had trembled when she handed me a bottle of water in thanks, or how she'd smiled when the engine came roaring back to life. All they saw now was Eleanor Myers, elegant, composed, and important. Kyle's entire posture changed. He practically floated toward her, arms open, voice louder than necessary. "Ms. Myers, we're honored. Truly, please, come in. Let me introduce you to our board." She offered a gracious nod, but her eyes scanned the room, calm and deliberate. She hadn't seen me yet. "Everyone," Kyle continued, gesturing broadly. "This is the woman we've been waiting for, the cornerstone of our next phase, the one with the golden pen." Light laughter followed. Then Kyle turned, his gaze landing back on me. The smile on his face tightened. Something flickered behind his eyes, maybe annoyance, maybe embarrassment. He raised his glass, just slightly. "And speaking of surprises," he said, "let's give a warm welcome to Jessica's father." People clapped, softly, politely, out of obligation. "This man," Kyle continued, now louder, "has a special kind of timing. Shows up halfway through dinner, in boots, no less, smelling like, well, I won't say." Laughter again. Not from everyone, but enough to sting. Jessica stood frozen. She didn't say a word. Her fingers clutched the stem of her wine glass like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Kyle wasn't done. "But let's not judge too quickly," he said with mock solemnity. "After all, some of us contribute sweat. Others—" He let his words trail off, eyes landing on my stained cuffs. Well, at least he showed up. I didn't move, didn't blink. I just looked at him, this young man so eager to impress a room full of people who didn't know the first thing about loyalty, about family, about character. And then, finally, I looked at Jessica. Her eyes met mine for the briefest moment, then darted away, like it hurt too much to hold the truth. Or worse, like she was ashamed. It wasn't the first time I'd been humiliated. I'd been called worse by customers who didn't want to pay their bills, or by hotheads who thought they knew more than a mechanic with 30 years on the floor. But this was different. This was personal. Kyle straightened his tie, clearly pleased with himself. He turned his back to me, ready to lead Eleanor to her seat, ready to continue the parade. But he hadn't noticed that she had stopped walking. She was standing just a few feet inside the room, still holding her coat. And she was looking at me. At first, I thought maybe she didn't recognize me. She looked different now, composed in a way she hadn't been on the side of that mountain road. Her hair had settled, her coat crisp and expensive. There was no trace of engine smoke or panic in her eyes, but she was still holding her coat, and she was still looking at me. Kyle hadn't noticed. He was already halfway through a flattering introduction, gesturing broadly toward the tables, pointing out investors, engineers, potential partners, all with the same tone he used when naming off auction prizes at charity galas. "And if everything goes smoothly tonight," he said, voice full of pride, "we believe this collaboration will bring tremendous value to both parties. We've prepared some documents for your review. My father's already in touch with your legal." He stopped, because Eleanor hadn't moved. She stood there, perfectly still, coat over her arm, clutch slightly tilted, eyes locked not on him, but on me. And then she smiled, not politely, not awkwardly, but with the quiet, familiar warmth of someone who remembered the way you knelt in the gravel, in the cold, without asking anything in return. Kyle turned toward me, confused. "Is something wrong?" he asked her, his voice suddenly tight. Eleanor didn't answer right away. She walked, slowly, deliberately, toward where I stood near the far wall. Each step quieted the room a little more. The forks stopped clinking. The laughter dried up like a faucet closed too fast. Kyle stood mid-sentence, one hand frozen in the air as he glanced between her and me, confused. The rest of the room followed her movement like it was choreographed. Forks paused, glasses stilled, and whispers faded into nothing. She stopped just a few feet away, eyes still locked onto mine. I gave her a small nod. Nothing more. My palms still smelled faintly of engine oil, her lips curved, not politely, but with recognition. A quiet, knowing smile that didn't belong to this room full of velvet and glass. She looked like a woman who had just found something familiar in a foreign place. Then she spoke, only to me. "I'm glad you came," she said softly. I nodded again. "Didn't think you would." Her eyes softened. "I don't forget people who show up when it matters." Then she turned back to the crowd, her heels clicking once on the marble. No announcement, no raised voice, no drama, but the way everyone stared, first at her, then at me. You could feel the shift. Something had cracked. They didn't know what was coming, but they knew it was about to change everything. No one followed her at first. The silence she left behind seemed to stretch forever, like the echo of a slammed door in a church. Kyle stood frozen, his mouth half open, as if the next words might save the night. But no one prompted him. No one encouraged him. Even the string quartet stopped playing mid-piece, unsure whether they should continue. I didn't move. I didn't need to. Eleanor paused at the threshold, then turned around, just once. "I wasn't going to say more," she said calmly, "but I think some of you here need to hear what real decency looks like." Her voice carried, not loud, but solid. You could feel every syllable settle in the bones of the room. After my car died, I was standing there on the shoulder in heels, in the cold, with no cell reception. Cars passed me by for 20 straight minutes. Some slowed down, saw me, and kept driving. Some honked. She looked around, scanning the crowd slowly. "I know many of you were already on your way here. Some of you passed me on that road." A few faces shifted uneasily. One man looked down into his wine glass. Another cleared his throat. But he stopped. Eleanor continued, pointing back toward me. "He didn't know my name. He didn't ask what I did. He just said, 'Pop the hood,' and got to work." Kyle forced a chuckle. "That's Frank. He's a hands-on kind of guy." Eleanor ignored him. "He used his bare hands," she said, "in a dress shirt and good shoes, knowing full well he was going to a formal event. He got under my car. He checked the terminals. He made sure I had water in the radiator. When he was done, he didn't ask for thanks. He just said, 'Don't forget to replace that cable or you'll be right back here next week.' Then he wiped his hands, got in his truck, and drove away." She paused. "And when I arrived here, 30 minutes later, I watched that same man be treated like something someone had dragged in from the garage floor." Jessica looked like she might cry, but she still didn't speak. Kyle tried again, this time stepping toward Eleanor. "Please, Miss Myers, I think there's a misunderstanding. Frank is family. We just joke around that way. He knows we're just playing." "Right, Frank." I didn't respond. Kyle turned toward me, a little more desperate now. "Come on, tell her. We always mess with each other." Still, I said nothing. I didn't need to. Eleanor raised a hand. "Enough." She reached into her handbag and pulled out a folded envelope, the kind with thick sides and a wax seal. "Inside here," she said, "is the terms sheet I was prepared to sign tonight. An investment of $600,000 into Keller Ventures." Gasps, real ones this time. She held it in the air, then slowly tore it in half. "I don't do business with men who mock the very people that hold their families up." Then she turned to Kyle's father. "And I certainly don't invest in dynasties built on disrespect." The room was dead silent. Only the sound of the torn paper hitting the floor remained. She looked at me one last time, nodded, and walked out. The heavy doors clicked shut behind her. No applause, no protest, just the dull ache of embarrassment that spread like a slow fog through every corner of that grand room. Kyle stood there, pale. His father whispered something sharp into his ear. Jessica sat down quietly, still not looking at me. And me, I reached into my pocket, pulled out my old handkerchief, and wiped the last smear of grease off my knuckles. Then I poured myself a glass of water from the nearest pitcher and took a sip. The sound of the doors closing behind Eleanor echoed louder than anything said that night. For a full minute, no one spoke. Then came the unraveling. Kyle turned to his father, voice hushed but angry. What just happened? His father didn't answer. His eyes were on the torn contract still lying on the floor like an obituary. Someone near the bar bent over to pick it up, then thought better of it. Jessica finally rose from her seat, face pale, lips pressed tight. She looked toward me, for the first time since I arrived, but her mouth didn't open, not to apologize, not to explain, not to defend. The woman she used to be, the girl who once called me her hero, was nowhere in sight. Within moments, people began to excuse themselves, politely at first, checking their watches, making vague remarks about early mornings, then faster, quieter, with glances that said they didn't want to be associated with the fallout. Kyle chased after one or two of them, smiling too hard, assuring them it was all a misunderstanding, but the damage had already been done. I didn't move. I stood right where I was, sipping my water, letting the room burn down without striking a single match. Across the room, Kyle's mother muttered to her husband, "We should have vetted her more carefully. This is going to get out." And it did. 2 days later, I saw the headlines spreading through the industry blogs. Investor walks out of Keller deal after character concern at private dinner. Sources say family dynamic tanked funding talks. A local business columnist even ran a segment titled, "When Arrogance Backfires, a Lesson from the Mountains." No names were officially named, but the story was clear enough. And in a town like ours, stories had a way of sharpening themselves on repeat. Kyle tried to spin it, of course, hired a PR firm, posted a carefully worded statement about creative differences and alignment issues, but people weren't buying it. Venture interest dried up overnight. 2 other investors pulled out within the week. I heard from someone at City Hall that the grant Kyle had been courting was no longer under consideration. Their startup didn't collapse. Not yet. But it buckled. Quietly. Without fanfare. Like a cracked axle waiting to snap under pressure. I never said a word. I didn't need to. Let the silence do the work. A few days later, Jessica called. Twice. I didn't answer. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't want to make it easy. Kyle showed up at my door once, unannounced. No camera crew, no grin, just him in a rumpled coat, holding a bottle of wine like it could undo a year's worth of condescension. I didn't open the door, watched him through the blinds as he stood there for a full minute, then turned and walked away. I thought maybe he'd leave a note. He didn't. Back at their estate, I imagined the mood was different now. Less champagne, more silence, more closed doors and low voices. And maybe, just maybe, Jessica was starting to wonder how it all slipped through her hands. But me, I was back in my garage. A mug of black coffee in hand, the smell of old tools and motor oil lingering in the air. Peaceful, not triumphant, just still. Because sometimes, the best revenge is no revenge at all, just letting them drown in the sound of their own regret. The days after the dinner passed slowly, but they were good days. Cool mornings, quiet evenings, tools back in their drawers, radio playing soft blues from the garage window. I spent more time walking the woods behind my house, letting the wind brush past me like an old friend. No meetings, no performances, no masks, just peace. The kind you earn by staying true to yourself, even when no one's looking. I didn't think much about Kyle. I figured men like him always found a way to land on their feet, until the ground itself gave way. And even then, they'd blame the wind for blowing too hard. But Jessica, I thought about her. I thought about how she didn't look at me that night, how her silence had been louder than any insult. I wasn't angry, not anymore, just tired. Of waiting for people to remember who you used to be to them. Then, one Sunday morning, just as I was tightening a bolt on the back gate, I heard the crunch of gravel in the driveway. I turned and saw her. She stepped out of her car slowly, no makeup, no fancy clothes, no Kyle, just Jessica. She stood there for a long second, hands in her coat pockets, eyes already red like she'd been crying on the way over. I didn't speak. I just waited. I should have said something, she whispered. The wind moved between us. I should have told them to shut their mouths. I should have told them you raised me better than that. I didn't nod. Didn't shake my head either. She stepped closer. I was scared of making a scene, of upsetting Kyle's family, of being the one who always causes tension. She swallowed hard. But that's not who I want to be anymore. I looked at her then. Really looked. The girl I used to hold on my shoulders after every softball game. The young woman I had driven through snowstorms just to bring soup to when she was sick in college. She hadn't gone anywhere. She was just buried under noise. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "You're still my daughter," I said. She blinked fast, lips trembling. "You were never not," I added, softer this time. "And I'll always show up for you, Jess, even when you don't look back." She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me, not the light, quick kind of hug people give at awkward holidays, but the full-hearted kind, the kind that says I'm sorry, and I missed you, and I love you, all at once. "I don't want him to come here," she said against my shoulder. "Not now, not yet. I just want it to be you and me for a while." I nodded. "Then that's how it'll be." We spent the afternoon in the kitchen, making coffee, talking like we used to, about nothing and everything, about Mom, about her old Civic, about how she hated calculus but loved building things. We didn't talk about Kyle. We didn't need to. That part would sort itself out. Or it wouldn't. But the part that mattered, it had never really broken. It had just gotten quiet. And now, it was speaking again. I've been called a lot of things in my life. Mechanic, blue collar, old-fashioned, just a dad. But I'll tell you something no one ever says out loud. At some point, this world tries to convince men like me that we've outlived our usefulness, that we've become background noise, furniture, something to be tolerated, not heard. They don't say it directly. No. They just stop asking what we think. They stop listening when we speak. They invite us last, seat us near the back, introduce us with titles we haven't used in years. But that dinner, that night, that was the first time I truly realized, it's not age that makes people invisible. It's when others believe your kindness means you've forgotten your worth. I hadn't forgotten. And if you're listening to this, neither should you. We don't need to raise our voices to be heard. We don't need to strike back with anger or slam doors to prove our strength. Sometimes, all it takes is standing still while others unravel. Sometimes, you just let the world see who you are, and let them show who they are in return. My daughter came back to me. Not because I yelled, Not because I guilted her into it, but because when the noise died down, the truth was still standing. And if you've ever sat alone wondering whether you still matter, whether the years you gave, the hands you offered, the roofs you fixed, the children you raised, were ever seen, let me say this plainly: they were. And even if no one says it out loud, there will come a moment, a quiet one, when all of it will matter again, because the world can forget your name, your title, your job, but it never forgets how you made people feel when they needed someone most. And one day, when it matters, that will be the thing that turns everything around. So hold your ground, stay decent, and never mistake silence for weakness. We're not invisible. We're just watching. They thought I was just the old man with grease on his hands. But grease washes off, and character doesn't.